Hey guys, tonight we're traveling back to a world of wooden carts, flickering torchlight, and the distinct scent of roasted root vegetables where the biggest threat to your safety wasn't a plague or an invading army, but your neighbor's suspicions. You're wandering through a medieval village and every step you take might just be a step toward the stake. Why? Because tonight we're unraveling 15 seemingly harmless things, little habits, quirks, and routines that could have gotten you branded a witch. And spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your current location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're all tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge across a muddy lane in your scuffed leather boots, glancing down to avoid stepping into the runoff from the butcher's cart. You mutter something under your breath, just a little complaint about the smell, maybe even a curse on your boots for soaking through again. But the old woman selling turnips across the lane hears you. She narrows her eyes. You weren't talking to her. You weren't even talking to anyone. Just like that, you've made a mistake. In the 14th century, talking to yourself in public, especially if you looked frustrated, dazed, or like you were arguing with an invisible person, was an immediate red flag. And while today you'd just be labeled quirky, eccentric, or maybe in your podcast era back then, someone would start whispering, "She speaks to spirits," they'd say, "talks to unseen things." It didn't help if your timing was off, say you mumbled angrily near someone, and they happened to trip a few seconds later. Congratulations, you've just been upgraded from mutterer to malefica. Historians still argue whether the paranoia was truly rooted in Christian superstition, or simply a convenient excuse to get rid of people who made others uncomfortable. But either way, murmuring to yourself was especially dangerous if you were a woman of a certain age, say, past childbearing, unmarried, and not particularly well-liked. You didn't even need to be old, just not connected to anyone. The problem wasn't the words, it was the silence around them. When you speak, and there's no one visible listening, the assumption becomes that something is. Let's say it's a chilly morning. You're walking to market, muttering to yourself about how you forgot to salt the goat's cheese. You say something like, stupid, should have done it last night." A girl hears you. That same night, her mother burns her hand on the cooking pot. Guess who gets mentioned over supper? Now sure, not everyone who talked to themselves got accused of witchcraft. Some were just laughed at or avoided. But enough were interrogated or even executed that keeping your lips sealed in public became a survival instinct. There's a strange little case in a German village, never officially verified, but often told among fringe historians, of a blacksmith's wife who was caught gesturing and whispering to herself in the forest while gathering kindling. When questioned, she claimed she was rehearsing a song. The lyrics never remembered. What was remembered was the town priest saying, "No woman sings to trees unless she expects them to answer." She vanished a week later. And this wasn't isolated. A French abbey recorded complaints about a woman who walked the hills, whispering with her hands in her sleeves. She was supposedly praying, but villagers insisted they saw birds circle above her head as she moved. That kind of spectacle was enough. When she returned from one of her walks and found her cottage ransacked, she simply left the village. Likely a wise choice. You begin to notice as you move through this imagined medieval town how silent most people are. There's gossip, of course, plenty of whispers, but it's all directed at someone never seemingly into the air. Children chatter, yes, but adults, they measure their words carefully, especially outdoors. You pass a woman feeding pigs, and even as one nearly bites her hand, she only grits her teeth. No expletive, no prayer, No complaint. It wasn't just superstition, it was pattern recognition gone wrong. People saw outcomes and tried to trace them back to something. When the plague swept through a hamlet, and only the woman who spoke to herself remained uninfected, what conclusion do they jump to? Exactly. Now imagine being someone with anxiety or with a tendency to verbalize your thoughts. Maybe you hum while you work. Maybe you say your to-do list out loud. That makes you a perfect candidate for whispered accusations. You don't even need to say anything suspicious. Just the habit is enough. What made this even trickier is the growing influence of formal church doctrine during the height of witch paranoia. The Fourth Lateran Council had declared confession mandatory, and suddenly every whisper might be a secret, held too close too long. If you're not saying your sins to a priest, but they hear you whispering in the woods, well, you must be confessing to someone else. Something else. Of course, not all historians agree on the extent of this fear. Some claim that rural villages were too busy surviving to care much about such things, unless someone died. Others insist that smaller communities were more likely to accuse since every minor tragedy hit harder and demanded explanation. But let's bring it back to you. You're standing at a water trough now, scrubbing the grime off your hands, whispering, "Stupid shoes." And someone behind you clutches their rosary a little tighter. They saw your lips move. They didn't hear what you said. That doesn't matter. Because in a world with no earbuds, no inner monologue, TikToks, no sympathetic therapists, if you talk and no one's supposed to be listening, the only one left is the devil. And you might be his mouthpiece. Sleep tight. You're up early again before the bells toll basket slung over your arm as you wander through the dew-slick woods just outside town. It's peaceful here. The world not quite awake, branches dripping with the remnants of fog. You reach down, brush aside a patch of nettles, and pluck a few sprigs of wild rosemary. You're not doing anything unusual. You just want your stew to taste better tonight. Unfortunately, congratulations, you've just triggered habit number 2, collecting herbs and plants. Even if you're just trying to spice your broth, or ease your husband's endless complaints about his aching knees, this one habit could get you tied to a post while someone piles kindling at your feet. Because in the medieval mind, a woman wandering alone into nature and coming back with handfuls of leaves and roots wasn't foraging, she was concocting. And concocting meant magic. There was a very fine and often invisible line between herbal knowledge and witchcraft. The difference, mostly, whether people liked you that week. For example, gathering dandelion root to ease digestion. Perfectly fine if you're the local priest's cousin. But if your goat escaped last week and trampled someone's barley crop, suddenly that same root becomes poison preparation. It gets worse if you seem too good at it. A neighbor's fever breaks after drinking your tea. Must have been cursed in the first place, and you just undid the hex you yourself cast. Historians still argue whether herbalists were truly seen as witches from the start, or whether their reputations only turned sour after a bad harvest or a sick child. What we do know is that herb collection was one of the most common proofs cited in witch trials across Europe. And there's something extra damning about the plants themselves. Mugwort, mandrake, belladonna, nightshade, henbane. You may know them now as ingredients in folklore, maybe even used in small doses in natural remedies. But in the 1300s, those names had weight. They had stories. Mugwort was said to ward off evil until someone decided it attracted it. Belladonna could help with pain until someone's cow died, and it turned out the woman who'd gathered it had been near the pasture that morning. Even chamomile, innocent little chamomile, was once accused of lulling a lord to death when administered as tea to calm his nerves. But again, it wasn't about the plants. It was about you using them. If a man picked rosemary for his lamb, it was seasoning. If a woman did it while whispering a rhyme, it was a spell. And let's be honest, you probably do hum while you forage. Maybe even a little chant to remember what's safe. Something like foxglove for the fluttering heart. Mugwort makes the pain depart. Cute, practical. Try singing that where someone can hear you. And then there's the baskets. Oh yes, baskets were incriminating. A straw-woven herb basket with multiple compartments. That's not organization, that's evidence. Each section a different tool in your supposed arsenal of curses. A few bits of bark here, a pinch of moss there, just enough to make someone nervous. And if any of it smells particularly strong, say goodbye to your clean name. One fringe tidbit that pops up in folklore circles: some villagers swore that witches had to collect herbs before sunrise, especially on certain holy days like midsummer. So if you were spotted in the fields just as the light was changing, maybe trying to beat the heat, or get back before your children woke up, you'd get labeled as a moonworker, a night gatherer, a hedge witch. It didn't help that some herbs naturally bloom or release their oils best just before dawn. Science hadn't caught up to botany. Magic had. There's a documented case, real this time, straight from the 1580s, of an elderly woman in England who gathered yarrow and feverfew for what we now think was a rudimentary migraine remedy. After a young girl she had helped recovered quickly, someone mentioned the green woman's hymns. She was interrogated by the village constable. No one cared that she'd spent her life tending the sick. What mattered was that she'd spoken to the earth. Even more chilling. Her neighbors turned on her not because of what she picked, but because she'd never taught them how to do it. You feel that now, don't you? The weight of the basket over your arm. The knowledge that even your wisdom can turn dangerous if you don't share it, or if you share it with the wrong person. And this extends beyond wild plants. Let's say you grow your own herbs behind your home. A tidy little garden. Mint, thyme, sage, parsley. To us, a Pinterest-worthy patch of green. To them, a known source of potion ingredients. If you're clever with your hands, good at making tinctures or balms, you're labeled a cunning woman. And cunning only sounds like a compliment until you read it in the trial records. Of course, men gathered herbs, 2 monks in particular. But monks had libraries and Latin names to hide behind. You just have stained fingers and too much time alone in the woods. Let's not forget that even the method of carrying herbs could be suspect. Dried bundles tied with string, those are witches' bunches, kept over your door for protection. Obviously, protection from your own summoned spirits. One debated account no one can quite agree. If it's true or just a cautionary tale, describes a woman who tried to hang thyme and lavender in her windows for scent and flies. The smell wafted down the road caught the attention of a passing friar, and within a week she was accused of perfuming demons. So now, as you stand here among the hedges, fingers stained with leaf oil, the first light of morning brushing over the treetops, you have to decide. Do you take your basket straight home? Do you explain what every leaf is for, or do you risk hiding it, pretending you were just walking? Because out here under the open sky, even helping people is dangerous. And if someone's child dies after drinking your tea, or their cough worsens instead of fading, they won't remember your good intentions. They'll remember the smell of your herbs, the color of your eyes, and the way you whispered to the roots before pulling them. Sleep lightly tonight. You're back in the village now, the sun just beginning to climb behind the crooked spire of the chapel. Children run barefoot through the muddy lanes and vendors are setting out their crates of wilting produce. It's almost comforting until you catch sight of a furry black shape weaving between the stalls. A cat. specifically your cat. She trots straight to you, tail high, purring like a tiny bellows. You reach down and scoop her up instinctively soft fur against your cheek, claws kneading gently at your shoulder. You don't notice the silence around you until you hear it. "She's got it again," someone murmurs. It. Not her, not Mittens or Nix or whatever charming name you've given your feline friend, no it. Which brings us to today's little mistake owning a black cat, or any pet that seems a bit too smart. That purring bundle of sass in your arms. To your neighbors, she isn't just a mouser. She's a familiar, a shape-shifted demon sent to assist you in your unholy dealings. You think you're stroking a cat. They think you're feeding the devil. In medieval folklore, a familiar was a supernatural creature bound to a witch, often taking the form of a domestic animal, cats, toads, ferrets, and sometimes birds. And the closer the bond between you and your pet, the more suspicious it became. If it followed you without being called, purred when you chanted, or heaven forbid slept in your bed, it was more than a companion. It was an accomplice. Historians still argue whether the idea of the familiar was a late invention of the witch trials, or something older born from rural superstition and fear of the uncanny. But one thing's clear, having a clever animal was dangerous business, and nothing was more suspicious than a black cat. The color black in medieval Europe already carried a heavy symbolic weight, night mystery morning. Add a glinting pair of eyes in the dark, and a habit of silently watching people from rooftops, and suddenly your adorable stray becomes an omen, or worse, a spy. There's a well-worn tale of a woman in Essex whose cat would sit in the churchyard during Mass. It didn't make a sound, didn't move, just stared. That was enough. When the local baron's son fell ill weeks later, the woman and her silent companion were accused together. She confessed under duress, said her cat would whisper in her sleep. Now, whether she really believed that or just wanted the torment to stop, that's anyone's guess. Your own cat might be a sweetheart chasing beetles curling beside the hearth, mewing for scraps. But if she brings you a dead mouse and someone sees it, that's not a gift. That's a blood offering, and you've just received it. And it doesn't even have to be a cat. In parts of Northern Europe, toads were considered particularly demonic. Sluggish, warty, and always lurking in damp places if you were spotted with one perched near your garden or hopping after you during a storm. Suspicious. There's even a recorded case from Poland where a woman was condemned after children claimed to have seen a weasel whispering into her ear. The weasel, of course, didn't speak, but it had lingered too close for comfort during one of her outdoor prayers. And then there's the fringier side of this fear, pets who understand human speech. You call your dog, and it comes. You say no, and it stops. You clap your hands, and it dances. All cute, unless you're a widow with a sharp tongue and no friends. Then it's proof of sorcery. Your beast knows too much. You've taught it unnatural things. In one of the lesser-known trial transcripts from 16th century Lorraine, a woman was accused after her goose followed her to market 3 times in 1 week. Each time she insisted she'd locked it in the coop. That goose, she said, just loves me. But a monk present at her trial noted only devils pursue women with such affection. Even parrots, rare though they were, drew suspicion. Imported by wealthy merchants, these birds mimicked human speech and could repeat prayers, curses, or gossip. If you were a servant caught with a talking bird and it said something rude, well, it must have learned it from you. You reach the edge of the village square, and your cat is still perched on your shoulder like a tiny shadow. A child points. His mother yanks him back. You hear the word hex muttered under someone's breath. Let's be honest, cats are weird. They knock things over. They stare into corners. They meow at nothing. Combine that with a medieval worldview where every unexplained behavior has supernatural meaning, and you've got a recipe for suspicion. One quirky but terrifying tidbit. In some places, it was believed that if your animal died at the same time as you, or even showed grief at your death, that was final proof the two of you were bound by dark magic. There's a bizarre case from Norway, where a woman's dog howled at her grave for 3 days. The townsfolk, already suspicious of her, dug her up again, just to be sure she wasn't faking death to escape judgment. She wasn't. But the dog vanished after that. Today we celebrate animal companionship. Back then, affection could damn you. You walk faster now, tucking your cat into the folds of your shawl, but it's too late. People have seen. You've already crossed the line. Your affection is a liability. Your loyalty to something that isn't human is suspicious, and the animal can't defend you. It can't be called to testify. It just stares with big, trusting eyes while people argue about whether it serves you or something darker. So what do? Give the cat away, abandon it, maybe? But what if it follows you again? What if someone finds it lingering near your door? In this world, innocence doesn't matter. Neither does affection. What matters is perception and your sweet little companion. She might just be your undoing. You sit in your cottage now, shutters cracked just enough to let in the golden spill of afternoon light. A kettle hums gently over the fire. You're grinding something in a worn mortar-dried bark and a few peppercorns. The room smells sharp, earthy, like someone's cooking in a forest. You're not cooking. You're helping. Your neighbor's boy has a fever, and you promised her a remedy, a little tea to cool the body. Something passed down from your mother and her mother before that. She trusts you, for now. But this is habit number 4, knowing too much about medicine. Being too skilled, too accurate, or too confident when it comes to health, especially when you're not a man of the cloth or a university-trained doctor, was one of the fastest ways to attract suspicion. Even if you were the only one in your village actually keeping people alive. And it was women who bore the brunt of this. Midwives, healers, herb wives. They'd know how to turn willow bark into a pain reliever, how to stitch a wound without rotting the flesh, how to turn a difficult birth from fatal to manageable. They didn't use Latin. They didn't wear robes. They wore aprons and blood-stained hands, which made them dangerous. Not because they failed, but because so often they didn't. Historians still argue whether midwives were genuinely targeted more than others, or whether the stories have been amplified by modern rereadings of trial texts. But records do show this much: women who delivered babies, performed healing, and didn't die in childbirth themselves were frequently looked at askance, as if surviving what others didn't marked you out as unnatural. And let's be honest, some of them were unnaturally good at what they did. You know things: how to stop a bleeding nose with cobwebs, how to ease a toothache with clove oil, how to make a poultice for the boils that keep cropping up on people's necks. You've studied the signs of plague. You know when to send someone away and when to keep them close. You even know how to detect faking, like the time you caught old Bernard pretending to limp for extra bread. You said nothing, but he saw the way you looked at his foot, like you saw inside it. That's the problem. You see too much, and worse, you say too much. Like earlier this spring when you said aloud that Marie's baby would come early, and it did 3 days later in a storm. Everyone called it second sight. But Marie, she didn't meet your eyes for a month. It's not just the knowledge, it's the timing. You hand someone a bark tea and their fever breaks. People are grateful. Then it happens again and again, and suddenly they're nervous. Because when the bishop's cousin took ill, the real doctor couldn't help him. But your mix of garlic and whorehound did. And the doctor didn't like that. Said it must have been coincidence or worse, a counterpoison. Suggesting, of course, that you were involved in the cause and the cure. And the worst part? You can't even explain how you know what you know. You just do. You've seen enough death to recognize the signs. You've held enough dying hands to understand how the body quits. You don't need to be told. You feel it in your bones. But bones don't have degrees. They just rattle when someone accuses you. There's a peculiar little case tucked into the annals of a Bavarian convent in the 1400s. A nun with an extraordinary talent for healing wounds was accused after a soldier's shattered leg mended too quickly. They said she had summoned something to pull the bones straight. She swore it was just a poultice of sheep's lard and lavender. They forced her to show them the recipe. When the next man died despite her efforts, they called it divine punishment. She disappeared soon after. You press the mixture into a cloth, now fold it into a pouch, and set it aside to cool. It smells faintly of bitter orange and ash. Something you'd never call a miracle, but they might. You're not immune to fear. You've watched women like you be questioned for less. A neighbor who knew how to ease cramps with fennel seeds was accused of ending pregnancies she had no right to touch. Another who used vinegar compresses during plague season was blamed for attracting the sickness in the first place. That's the irony. When you cure someone, you're a sorceress. When they die anyway, you're a murderer. And the men in robes, the ones with their books and incense and sacred oils, they're not judged the same way. They can fail over and over. Their treatments can kill. But it's seen as divine will not human error. You're just a woman with a kettle and a cupboard full of bark and roots. You weren't trained by monks. You were trained by your grandmother, who once told you how to pull out a splinter with warm honey. That's not medicine to them. That's magic. A weird but true fringe belief in parts of France said that women who could deliver babies without pain were reverse cursed, meaning they had robbed the pain from another woman somewhere far away. That woman's agony would be transferred elsewhere to balance the scales. Imagine being accused of that when you're just trying to ease a mother's screams. Now the neighbor's knock comes. You answer, hand her the cooled pouch, tell her how to steep it. You say softly, make sure he drinks it before dusk. That's just timing. Logical. But she nods with wide eyes like you've just whispered a spell. You want to explain. To say it's only a matter of temperature. Of how the fever breaks best after rest. But she's already turning away, clutching your bundle like a sacred object. Or a cursed one. You close the door slowly. You feel it in your chest, tight and cold. Not fear, not yet, but something close. Because all it takes is one child who doesn't wake up. One husband who dies anyway. One nosy neighbor who sees you preparing your remedies by candlelight. And your knowledge becomes your guilt. Your hands once praised will be called unholy. You'll no longer be a healer. You'll be something sus entirely. Sleep with one eye open. The days are getting shorter now. The shadows stretch a little longer across the thatch-roofed homes, and you find yourself lighting the hearth before supper. Not because it's cold, but because the light makes you less alone. Not that it helps much. Because tonight, like every other, you'll be returning home to a dark little cottage just past the last cobbled street alone. No husband to greet you. No children tugging at your skirt. Just the low creak of your own door as it opens and the sigh of the wind slipping through the frame. And that brings us to habit number 5, living alone on the edge of town. In medieval times, solitude wasn't a lifestyle choice. It was a red flag. A big waving crimson stitched with devil symbols red flag. Communities were tightly knit, and everyone had a place. You lived with family or servants or both. You worked in clusters in households that overlapped. The idea of someone, especially a woman, choosing or enduring life in isolation was not just odd. It was dangerous, because if no one is watching you, what are you doing? Your little cottage on the edge of the woods. Yes, the one with ivy creeping over the window might feel quaint, peaceful, but to them it's too far from the church, too close to the forest, too quiet. And if the chimney smokes at strange hours, if a lantern glows late at night, if someone hears a whisper through the trees and no one can confirm who you were speaking to, you see where this is going. Historians still debate whether these isolated homes were always seen as suspicious, or whether the suspicion followed after an accusation. Did solitude breed fear, or did fear drive people into solitude? Either way, once you were alone, you stayed marked. You walk through the market now, the sun sinking low behind the hills. You nod to a woman selling onions. She doesn't nod back. You keep walking. It's not that anyone shouts at you. That would be too bold. But no one talks. No one asks about your day. And that silence, that is worse. In the village's mind, your aloneness isn't unfortunate. It's intentional. And intentional solitude implies secrecy. You must be hiding something. What else could explain your self-sufficiency? You fix your own roof tiles. You tend your own goats. You make your own soap, your own butter, your own decisions. And that makes people uncomfortable. A man alone in the woods is a hermit. A woman, a witch. Let's look at one fringe tidbit that gets whispered about in folklore. In some parts of the Holy Roman Empire, it was believed that witches could only do their work if no one was watching. So any woman who regularly worked alone, especially at dusk, was thought to be engaging in unsupervised sorcery. Even something like spinning wool in the twilight could be twisted into evidence. And let's say someone's cow goes missing, or a storm destroys the crops, or worst of all, a child falls ill. People don't look at each other for blame. They look outward past the tidy hedges and smoky chimneys past the last garden row, to your little house with the single candle in the window. There's a real case recorded in the inquisitorial trials of southern France, one that still stirs debate. A woman in her early 50s, never married, lived half a mile from the village center. She was known to be quiet, clean, and helpful until 2 infants died in the same week. One of the mothers, grieving and hollow-eyed, said, "She lives alone. She chose to live alone." That was enough. The woman was arrested within days. No proof of wrongdoing, but all the signs were there. No family, no children, and a knowledge of herbs too deep for a Christian. You've seen that look in your neighbor's eyes, too. That glance that slides over you and away again. That almost greeting. The twitch of a sleeve like they're about to speak, then remember something and don't. You're not a person to them. You're a possibility, a theory. Even the way your home is positioned is enough. Near a well-worn animal path, that's a sign witches are said to walk where beasts wander. Built near a crossroads, even worse crossroads were often associated with magic spirits and bad endings. One scholarly debate still rages among medievalists. Did witches live at the edge of villages because that's where they could practice freely, or were they pushed there over time, exiled by slow, suffocating suspicion? Either way, the outcome's the same. You live alone, and that means you're watched closely. Even if no one visits, they see the smoke from your chimney. They see the footprints in the snow, the light through your window. If you laugh too loud, why, who are you laughing with? If you cry, what sorrow have you brought down? If someone thinks they hear a sound from your cottage, especially one that can't be explained, it becomes fact. One story from the edges of Wales tells of a woman who supposedly sang as she baked. Not a tune anyone knew, a slow, looping melody with no words. She said it was from her grandmother, who came from the Sea Islands. That was enough for suspicion. She was called salt-tongued after that, a veiled insult that meant touched by ocean spirits. After 3 deaths in a harsh winter, her door was nailed shut from the outside. You return home now. The sky's gone pink. A few birds wheel overhead, screeching before settling into trees. You see your own cottage, nothing strange about it, really. One shutter hangs crooked, and the roof leaks a little in spring. The broom is propped against the door. The dried rosemary above the lintel is for luck. But you still check behind you as you unlock the door. You still close it quickly. Because being alone means no one can defend you. And worse, no one will. If a neighbor shows up with an accusation tomorrow, if the priest calls you in for questioning, there won't be anyone to speak for you. No husband to swear on your character. No sister to vouch for your history. Just your silence. And that's the loudest sound of all. There's a shimmer of heat on the road today, and you brush your hair back from your brow as you pass the open windows of the tavern. Laughter spills out, followed by the smell of ale and roasted onions. You catch your reflection in a warped pane of glass, a flicker of red in your hair catching the sun. And just like that, you're in trouble again. Welcome to habit number 6, having red hair or unusual eyes. In a world full of brown and bone blonde, any deviation becomes dangerous. That streak of copper glinting at your temple, that flash of amber in your gaze. Those aren't genetics. Those are omens. And omens have no place in a well-behaved village. It's not your fault. You were born this way, but medieval Europe didn't care about alleles and recessive traits. It cared about meaning. And when people didn't understand something, they gave it meaning whether you asked for it or not. Red hair in particular has a long history of suspicion. Judas Iscariot, they claimed, was a redhead. And since betrayal and sin had to leave some visible mark, well, anyone with a similarly stained crown might be dangerous too. Historians still argue whether this anti-redhead sentiment was widespread or more localized to certain pockets of Europe. But trial records, sermons, and even art point to one common belief: the devil marks his own. So if you had red hair, whether bright as flame or just ruddy in the right light, you were marked. Worse still, if your eyes didn't match the village norm. Light-colored eyes, too cold, piercing. Eyes that looked like they could see beyond the veil. One particularly unlucky combination, red hair and green eyes. That wasn't a person. That was a warning. You walk the lane now and feel eyes watching you. The cobbler's apprentice nudges his friend and whispers something, nodding your way. Maybe it's just the sun, or maybe it's the color of your braid, the way it refuses to stay tied back, always curling out like living flame. There's a fringe belief still clinging to the edge of folklore that witches didn't choose to be witches, they were born already different. Red hair, 6 fingers, a birthmark, shaped like a crescent moon, any of these marked you from the cradle. Some even said a red-headed child should be baptized twice, once for God and once for the devil, just in case. There's a case from Hungary where a girl only 10 was accused of cursing livestock simply because 3 sheep died after she touched them. Her eyes were mismatched, one blue, one brown. The village priest called her God's dice. She didn't return to school after that. In your village, no one said anything directly. But they don't have to. The glances do enough. And when someone you've known for years suddenly won't meet your eyes, that speaks louder than accusation. You remember being little, standing at the river with other children. One of them pointed at your hair in the sunlight and said, "It glows." You smiled. Then another said, "My mother says witches glow when no one's looking." The laughter that followed wasn't cruel. Not yet. But it stuck with you. And now that you're older, it isn't funny anymore. Especially not when crops fail. Or someone wakes from a nightmare screaming that a red spark was watching them. Even the monks spread suspicion. Some scriptures, mistranslated or misremembered, described hell as a red house beneath a burning sky. Any association with fire became dangerous. The irony, of course, is that many saints were depicted with red hair in stained glass, Mary Magdalene, for example. But no one in the village remembers that. They only remember the fear. One unusual tidbit often dismissed by mainstream scholars, but whispered in old herbalist circles, it was said that red-haired women couldn't be bewitched because they already had fire in their blood. Some believed they couldn't be harmed by dark magic, which of course meant the only explanation was that they wielded it themselves. A red-haired woman who never got sick, dangerous. A red-haired girl who healed quickly from burns, unnatural. Let's say someone cuts their hand in the market and you rush to help. You tear part of your apron, press it to the wound. It slows the bleeding. The person thanks you at first, but later they remember the warmth in your hands, the way your eyes glinted in the sun, how quickly the wound closed. That's not kindness. That's power. And power you didn't earn, especially if you're a woman, must come from somewhere dark. You reach your cottage that evening and catch your reflection again in a puddle near the steps. Your hair's loose now, curling wildly. Your eyes look tired. But to the right set of eyes, they still look wrong. Too bright. Too knowing. You remember the widow in the next hamlet over who was accused simply because her eyes never cried when her husband died. Unnatural grief, they said. Her eyes stayed dry too long. You'd cried, though. You remember crying for 3 days when your sister passed. But people forget tears. They remember hair. And no matter how tightly you braid it, no matter how deep you tuck it under a bonnet, that color always finds a way to shine through. So tonight, you sleep with your hair hidden beneath a cloth and your windows shuttered against moonlight. But it won't matter. Not when the village already sees the color of flame in your shadow. Not when they've decided what that means. It's laundry day, which means you're trudging down the slope toward the river basket, creaking on your hip. Soaps wrapped in cloth and your hands already chapped raw from the scrubbing that lies ahead. It's not glamorous, but it's necessary, especially when the air grows thick and the flies begin to bite. You can't have linens stinking in this heat. So you wash, often, carefully, thoroughly. And just like that, you've made another mistake. Because this is habit number 7, bathing too often or not at all. Welcome to the ridiculous paradox that is medieval hygiene suspicion, where both cleanliness and filth could mark you as a witch. The devil apparently had no preference. He could visit you in the bathhouse or in the dirt beneath your fingernails. Let's start with the clean side. You bathe more than your neighbors, not because you're vain, but because you don't enjoy the feeling of sweat clinging to your skin. Maybe you keep a private barrel for warm soaks. Maybe you even know a trick with rosemary and lime peel that keeps your skin clear and soft. And that right there is the problem. Because people notice. They notice your hands aren't cracked with grime. They notice your hair doesn't cling to your scalp like straw. They notice you don't smell like goat or old cabbage. They whisper. Too clean, someone mutters. Too fresh for someone who lives alone. They don't trust it. Because in the medieval mind, bathing was complicated culturally, theologically, and superstitiously. You see, public bathhouses had once been accepted, even encouraged by the church. But after a while, around the time of increasing plague outbreaks and rising fears of temptation, they became associated with sin. Nakedness bred gossip. Pleasure bred suspicion. And water, which once meant purity, became tangled in warnings. Some claimed demons traveled in water. Others said witches bathed to wash off the devil's touch after night Sabbaths. Either way, stepping into a tub too often meant you had something to hide or someone to impress. Historians still argue about just how often people bathed in the Middle Ages. Some say folks washed daily, at least hands and faces. Others argue that full-body immersion was rare. But one thing is certain: frequency became suspect when paired with anything unusual. A woman with luminous skin and clean fingernails. She must be enchanting herself in the bath, using herbs to preserve youth, or worse, offering herself as bait for dark forces. There's a curious tidbit in a Florentine letter from the 1470s describing a widow who bathed every new moon with rose petals and milk. Her neighbors said her skin gleamed like silver. Her home was searched for love spells and powdered bones. Nothing was found. But her bathing barrels were destroyed anyway. On the flip side, if you don't wash often enough, if your clothes carry the scent of sweat and animal pens, if your hair tangles and your nails blacken, you're no better off. Because now you're hiding in filth. The theory went like this: witches disguised themselves in dirt so that their true nature wouldn't shine through. They cloaked themselves in decay. And if your skin looked bruised or your arms bore unexplainable marks, likely from bramble scratches or kitchen burns, those became signs of pact marks or demonic caresses. There's a chilling story from an abbey in Saxony about a woman who stopped bathing after her husband died. Out of grief, she let herself go. Her clothes frayed. Her face went unwashed. But one day, when asked how she still had healthy teeth, she answered, "I chew mint twigs." They took that as evidence of her using forest magic to maintain her smile. She was interrogated and later found drowned in the river. So it's lose-lose. Too clean, you're seducing the devil. Too dirty, you're hiding his mark. You can't win. Now picture yourself returning from the river. Your linens are cleaner than they've been in weeks, drying on lines near your garden fence. The scent of soapwort drifts up as you wring out the last shawl. You feel calm, whole, and then you see the priest watching you from the lane. His eyes flick down to the water puddling at your feet, to the strange blue flower you've tucked behind your ear, to the way you don't seem tired after hours of work. He says nothing, but tomorrow a boy will knock at your door and ask if you put something in the river. A fish was found dead. A dog drank from the shallows and became ill. They want to know if you poured something into the stream. You'll say no, of course. You'll say you used soap and ash and herbs just like always. But that's not reassuring to them, because you didn't buy soap at the market. You made it. And how, they ask, does a woman alone know how to make something that both cleans and heals? And why do your sheets dry whiter than anyone else's? There's even a fringe belief, one of the stranger ones, that witches never needed to wash because their bodies rejected dirt. A clean witch, they said, was unnatural, not because she bathed too often, but because the earth itself refused to cling to her. Imagine hearing that. Imagine standing barefoot in your own doorway, dust on your soles, and knowing someone thinks even that is suspicious. So what do? Bathe less, but then your skin itches and your hair tangles and you don't feel like yourself. Bathe more, but then they watch the way you walk to the stream, the way your clothes hug you when damp, the way your fire smells when you warm the water. They're not looking for the truth. They're looking for confirmation. You dry your hands, watching your sheets ripple in the breeze. They look so bright in the sun, too bright maybe, too clean for comfort. So tonight, you'll sleep a little dirtier. You'll leave a smudge on your cheek, just enough to pass inspection. Because in a world like this, cleanliness really can be a curse. The wind changes suddenly this morning, coming sharp off the moor with a chill that smells of wet stone and distant fire. You stop on the path near the old chapel and glance at the sky. Dark clouds are gathering low and fast. Rain by night, you murmur half to yourself. A farmer passing by hears you. He pauses, squints upward, then glances at you. You don't say another word. By evening, the first drops fall. By morning, the barley fields are flattened under a storm no one expected. And just like that, you've predicted the weather, which means you've just stumbled into habit number 8, making weather predictions. What's a harmless observation? Now, a joke about clouds, a guess about sunshine, was once a deeply suspicious behavior. In medieval Europe, the ability to sense the sky wasn't seen as intuition. It was seen as interference. If you knew when it would rain, thunder, hail, or frost, then you must have learned that knowledge from something or someone unholy. Because only God, they said, controlled the weather, and if you had access to that divine schedule, well, that wasn't divine. That was dangerous. You feel it every time you glance up at the horizon now, every time you taste a storm on the air, every time you hear a shift in the birdsong. Your body knows, your bones know, but your mouth, that's the liability. Historians still argue whether the fear of weather witches was a leftover from pagan rituals or something fanned by the church. Likely both. But in the rural villages of Europe, where crops were everything, and a single week of rain or frost could mean famine, weather wasn't just climate, it was life or death. And those who could speak about it too accurately were viewed not as wise but as suspect. You pass a group of women outside the bakery gossiping under shawls. You hear one of them mention that the mill flooded. Another mutters, "Someone must have called that storm." Called it. As if weather were a servant you could beckon like a dog or a ghost. And if someone called it well, the next step is asking who. Let's say you're a widow known for keeping to yourself. Let's say your plants always bloom earlier than the others. Let's say you once warned someone not to hang their laundry because the wind felt off, and then a sudden gale tore through and took out half the apple orchard. You're not helpful. You're culpable. There's a little-known court record from a village near Bremen, where a woman was accused not of creating a storm, but of predicting one too precisely. She told her neighbor to secure the thatch roof, and when it flew off during a hailstorm, the family claimed she'd opened the sky with her words. They tied her to a chair in the river. She survived the drowning. They claimed that was even worse proof the water refused to cleanse her. You adjust your shawl now, as the wind picks up again. Leaves scatter across the road like running birds. You're quiet. You don't say what you're thinking, that it'll freeze tonight, that the sheep will huddle low, that the baker's bread won't rise. Because you've learned. You've seen how quickly helpful turns to haunting. There's a fringe belief, especially in parts of Ireland and Brittany, that witches rode the wind, not metaphorically, but literally. They were said to travel through the air to their meetings, guiding storms like chariots. If a woman appeared too quickly after a lightning strike, or was seen moving too easily through heavy winds, some believed she wasn't walking at all. You once ran home during a storm, skirts-soaked hair plastered to your neck. You slipped on a stone and still got back before the others. You remember how the boy at the well looked at you, how he took a step back, how his friend whispered something with fond eyes. You never found out what he said. But the stares lingered for days. Let's not forget the most damning connection of all weather and curses. In some places, it was believed that witches cursed people by sending rain at the wrong time, or hail to destroy a wedding, or wind to carry voices into the ears of demons. If someone got married and the sky turned black, someone had willed it. Even worse if you could stop bad weather. There's a story, half fable, half truth from the Black Forest, about a woman who spread salt at her doorstep to keep the rain away. It worked. Her side of the field stayed dry. The neighbors flooded. They called her the Stormbender. She was whipped through the streets and forbidden to speak for a year. You still remember the time you tied red string across your windowsill during a hailstorm. An old trick. Something your mother taught you to calm the air. Your shutters stayed intact. The next house over lost half its roof. No one ever asked why. They didn't need to. They assumed. That's how it works here. Truth doesn't matter. Results do. And silence doesn't save you either. Because if a storm comes and you didn't warn anyone, why not? What did you know? And why did you keep it to yourself? So now you sit in your cottage, hands wrapped around a chipped clay cup, and listen to the wind rake across the trees. You know the pattern of this storm. You feel it in your knees in the rhythm of the firewood crackling behind you. You could mark it on a map, but you won't say a word. Because one too accurate comment might be the thing that tips the scale. That turns clever into cursed. That makes your voice sound like thunder to the wrong ears. So you sip your tea, keep your thoughts to yourself, and let the village find out the hard way that the rain's coming. You tried to help once. That was mistake enough. Your fingertips are sore today, not from thorns or firewood, but from tying knots. Thread, string, ribbon, whatever you can find. You're binding herbs for drying, braiding a charm to hang over your doorway, fastening your apron with that one tight loop that always holds. Your hands work without thinking, muscle memory honed over seasons. Twist, loop, pull. There's nothing magical about it, until someone else decides there is. Because welcome to habit number 9, using symbols, knots, or charms. You glance down now at the little bundle of rosemary and rue dangling from a bit of red yarn above your doorframe. You tied it last week. For luck, or maybe to keep moths away. You don't even remember. But a merchant's son passed your house this morning and stopped staring at it like it had eyes. And now he's told someone. And now they're watching. Knot magic, also called cord magic, charmcraft, or binding, was one of the most feared and misunderstood practices in medieval superstition. It didn't need blood. It didn't require fire or incantations. All it needed was intent and a piece of string. And intent in a world built on fear is easy to fabricate. Historians still argue whether the church truly believed in the power of knots and symbols, or simply used them as a catch-all accusation to weed out folk practices and unwelcome women. But what's undeniable is this tying things, especially 3 times, especially with purpose, was seen as dangerous. 3 knots in a cord and a whispered wish. That's not a wish. That's a spell. A braid of wool hung in a doorway. That's not decoration. That's a curse charm, a colored thread worn around your wrist. That's not for beauty, that's for binding spirits. Even innocent habits like braiding your hair in a particular pattern or wrapping your bread in a cross-marked cloth could look suspicious if someone wanted it to be. You tie things because you've always done so. You learned it from your mother, who learned it from her grandmother. She tied a black thread around your cradle to keep away fever. You don't remember it, but you still tie one around your bedpost every autumn when the cold starts to creep in. But today, when the butcher's daughter caught sight of the thread bracelet on your wrist, her face went pale. She asked if it was one of those. You didn't ask what she meant. You knew. It's not just knots either. Symbols too bring danger. You like to scratch things, little signs on your doorframe. A sun, a spiral, a star with a line through it. Not spells, just markers. But to your neighbors, those are witch marks. There's a documented case from Scotland, well-worn, but still chilling, about a woman who carved 7 spirals into the beams of her barn to keep her cows from wandering. When 3 calves were born deformed, the spirals were blamed. They said she'd invited other things into the barn. She said they were just doodles. It didn't matter. In many parts of Europe, specific knots were believed to control nature. A sailor's knot tied during a windstorm could calm the sea or summon it. A red cord wrapped 9 times around a cow's horn could cause a neighbor's milk to sour. A simple overhand knot in a baby's swaddling blanket could lock the soul in. And if you're seen tying knots in the presence of someone who later gets sick, you may as well start packing for the dungeon. There's a fringe tidbit in French folklore about a woman who tied blue thread around her goat's legs each spring. She said it was to keep wolves away. But when wolves started avoiding the valley altogether, the village said she must be calling them elsewhere, using the thread to redirect their hunger. She was exiled. Her goats were slaughtered. The thread burned. You touch the ribbon in your pocket now. It's green, fraying at the edge, tied once in a simple loop. You tied it around your waist during last winter's fever, just in case. You kept it, not for magic, for memory. But you hesitate to wear it, because someone saw your knot work on the herbs last week, and someone else mentioned the time you tied a bundle of garlic and salt under your eaves. All practical, all mundane. But when the midwife's own herbs went sour and her son developed a cough, she looked toward your door, saw the charm, connected the thread. The logic is thin, but that's never mattered. Knots were often considered a form of binding magic, a way to trap spirits, diseases, even people. If a man couldn't sleep and his wife had recently tied a cord around a doll's neck well, the spirit of the knot had leapt to him. They used to say witches tied weather into cords, selling them to sailors with instructions: untie 1 knot for a breeze, 2 for a storm, 3, and you'll never see shore again. You've never sold wind, but your knots hold memory, practicality, routine, and now potentially doom. You look around your cottage. How many knots have you tied? How many cords hang from the rafters wrapped around bundles of lavender and sage? How many loops hold tools to the wall? Each one could be reinterpreted. Each one could be described in a testimony remembered just slightly wrong. 3 twists with rosemary inside, hung above the door like a trap. Red thread, always red thread. Tonight, as the sun slips down behind the hills, you untie the charm from your window. Slowly, gently, like it's a limb you don't want to break. You tell yourself it's just to be safe, that you can always tie it again next week. but in your heart you know every untied knot is a little surrender. A piece of yourself loosened to keep the village calm. Because even a harmless loop of yarn can become a noose in the wrong retelling. And in this place your knots may hold power, but your silence holds survival. The moon is high and full tonight, casting a pale shimmer across the thatched roofs and cobblestone alleys. The village is still, windows dark, animals quiet, shutters drawn. No one's awake now except you. You're not doing anything strange, just walking. You couldn't sleep. You needed air. But there's something about your footsteps on the damp path, the way your silhouette flickers against the trees, that feels off. Like you've slipped through an invisible crack in the day, and now you're somewhere you're not supposed to be. Which brings us to habit number 10, being out at night without a reason. In medieval Europe, nighttime wasn't for strolling or stargazing. It was for sleeping or for sin. If you were seen outside your home after dark, there had better be a very good explanation. Otherwise, people would start assuming things. Unnatural things. Because what kind of woman walks alone at night with no lantern and no chaperone? Not one they trusted. It didn't matter that you couldn't sleep, or that the moonlight called to you more gently than the midday sun ever did. Being outside in those hours, especially if someone spotted you without knowing why, put you squarely in the territory of the other. Someone between things. Between light and dark. Between human and not. Historians still debate whether these suspicions were born of actual criminal concerns, bandits, poachers, and spies, or whether they were just an extension of church authority and rural fear. Either way, nighttime was not your friend. And it was especially not your friend if you were a woman. In countless records, one phrase repeats like a drumbeat. She was seen abroad after the sun had set. That alone was enough to begin an inquiry. You don't have to be doing anything sinister. In fact, the less you're doing, the worse it looks. Standing under a tree, staring at the sky, calling spirits. Walking the edge of the village, marking territory. Leaving flowers by the riverbank. Summoning something. You once picked wild sage beneath the moon, harmless, practical. You liked the way it smelled at night, how it softened in your hands. You brought it home and tucked it above your door. The next morning, a boy had a fever and a girl fell from a ladder. No one said your name out loud, but they looked at your house as they walked past. There's a fringe tidbit from Bavarian folktales that says witches walk faster at night, without sound and without breath. You laugh at that softly. If only your joints were so obliging. But the myth persists. So if someone thinks they saw you moving too fast between houses, or thinks your shadow fell across their wall when no one knocked, that becomes part of the story. There's a real account from Wales, 16th century, of a widow seen near the well just before dawn. She was fetching water, nothing unusual. But when the sun rose and the well was found to have frogs in it, a bad omen apparently, she was called before the magistrate. She insisted she only wanted clean water before the day grew hot. The magistrate replied, "Water comes from above or from sin." They fined her for walking without purpose, and that phrase "without purpose" has haunted you ever since. Because no reason is ever good enough. Say you're restless, and they'll say your soul wanders too. Say you dream of stars, and they'll say you consort with the heavens. Say you sleep lightly, and they'll say your guilt wakes you. There's a rule in the village unwritten, but ironclad doors stay shut after the 9th bell. Candles out. Voices low. Anyone breaking that rhythm risks suspicion. You've broken it 5 times this month. Once to check on a lamb giving birth. Once to bring in laundry left on the line. Once just to sit on your step and feel the world cool around you. twice, for no reason at all. You simply felt like walking. But that's not allowed. Even the moon can be your enemy. There's an old superstition still muttered among elders that full moons reveal the souls of witches, that if you look at a woman under moonlight and her face doesn't seem quite hers, she's not wholly human. You've caught your reflection in water before during a full moon. You don't look strange to yourself. But maybe that's the problem. You pass the blacksmith's house now where the shutters are cracked just a sliver. You catch a flicker of movement, someone watching. You keep walking, pace, steady eyes ahead. You're not ashamed. You haven't done anything wrong, but you're very aware of how the story would sound. She was seen walking alone, under the moon, with her hair uncovered. That's all it takes. Even the clothes you wear are suspect. If your cloak billows too much in the wind, or your skirts look dark and loose, it becomes part of the aesthetic they fear. Witches in tales are always wrapped in shadows, even if you're just trying to stay warm. And God help you if someone hears your footsteps but doesn't see your face. A disembodied sound in the night that becomes a legend by morning. There's a recorded case in a French village where a woman was accused of walking in two places at once. Someone saw her at the well. Another swore she was near the barn. Rather than assume one of them was mistaken, the villagers decided both were true. She splits herself, they said. She was put on trial. You finish your walk quietly, looping past the fields and back toward the woods near your cottage. You don't hum. You don't speak. You don't glance upward, even though the stars are beautiful tonight. You don't want to give them a reason, because in this world, nighttime isn't for the innocent. It belongs to the things they don't understand. And if you're out in it wandering alone, lit by nothing but your own curiosity, you're no longer just a person. You're a question they want to silence. It's spring again. The earth softens. Grass shoots up in tufts along the fence line. The sheep begin to lamb, and the air fills with a low chorus of moos, grunts, groans, and the occasional painful shriek. Birth is everywhere messy, loud, sacred in its own terrible way. And you're right in the thick of it. Your neighbor's heifer is in labor, her eyes wild, her flanks trembling. The calf's not coming easily. You roll up your sleeves and slide into the muck without hesitation because no one else knows how to help. Not the neighbor, not her husband, not even the village priest who's standing a safe distance away, clutching his rosary with white-knuckled hands. You work quickly, competently, and when the calf finally slips into the world with a slick, shuddering breath, your neighbor gasps and cries, and you're too tired to realize. You just committed habit number 11, helping animals give birth. It's not a crime, but it may as well be. Because in medieval Europe, midwifery for animals, especially large ones, especially livestock, was seen as more than just skilled labor. It was interference, and interference in the birth of beasts that reeked of unnatural power. The reasoning wasn't always clear, but it went something like this. If you could reach inside a creature and pull forth life, that meant you had authority over life. And if you had authority over life, what else might you control? Historians still argue whether this specific suspicion was more common in agricultural regions or tightly wound up in religious zones. Either way, the fear was real. Women who midwifed animals were often accused of tampering with God's designs. Some said you could steal the life meant for one animal and give it to another. If two calves were born, one healthy, one dead, they'd ask who touched which one first. You wash your hands now in a bucket of water, gone cloudy with afterbirth and hay. You don't look at the priest who muttered something under his breath when the calf cried out. You know that look. Not gratitude, not awe, fear. Because to them, you're not just skilled, you're too skilled. There's a recorded case from a village in Flanders. A woman known for her gift with birthing animals helped deliver twins lambs in this case. Both survived. Her neighbor's sheep a few pens over miscarried the same night. She was accused of transferring the life from one animal to another. She was questioned. Her hands were inspected for marks of Satan. She never helped again. You think of your own reputation now. You're the one who knows where to press on a cow's belly when the calf isn't turning. You're the one who knows when to wait and when to reach. You don't fear blood. You don't fear pain. And that makes you look more like a conductor than a helper. There's a fringe belief still echoing through European folklore that witches don't assist births, they command them. That they can whisper to a creature and make it open like a door. Some tales even speak of women who midwifed animals during the day and bore demons at night. You once sang to a goat as she struggled to birth her kid. A lullaby, no words, just a hum from your childhood. She calmed. The kid lived. You never sang again. It's not just what you do during the birth, it's what comes after. If the calf grows fast, you're accused of imbuing it with something unnatural. If it dies suddenly, you're blamed for giving it something else's fate. One story, mostly dismissed by scholars but stubbornly persistent, tells of a woman who birthed foals so healthy they never needed weaning. Villagers whispered that she swapped souls between creatures, that what lived inside her horses had once belonged to birds. You know how it feels to be watched like that. After helping the heifer today, you walk back to your cottage, straw in your hair, mud clinging to your skirt. You feel someone's eyes on your back the whole way. The priest doesn't speak, but he doesn't stop watching. And tomorrow, someone will mention your name at market. She pulled a calf from the womb with bare hands. Not even the vet can do that. She doesn't gag. She doesn't flinch. That's not normal. Even if you're invited to help, you're still marked. Because a woman who commands animals to open themselves is barely a woman at all in their eyes. She's something else. The worst part, there's no one else who can do what you do. You've saved foals, lambs, calves, dozens over the years, but no one thanks you anymore. They thank the saints. They thank the wind. They thank chance. They never thank you. You tie your apron on the peg and scrub your arms with coarse salt. The smell won't leave easily. It never does. But it's not the smell that stays with you tonight. It's the look the priest gave you. Like you weren't human. Like you were borrowed. And maybe, just maybe, he'll preach about it on Sunday. Not by name. Never by name. But his flock will listen. And if another birth goes wrong, if a goat bleeds out or a calf is stillborn, you'll hear them say it. She took too much last time. She opened the wrong gate. She meddled. So you curl into your bed that night, tired but alert, fingers still sore from the strain of pulling life from the body of a beast. And you wonder just for a second if the next animal who needs you will be the one that damns you. Tonight you're asleep. Or rather, you were asleep. But something woke you. You're not sure what. A creaking beam, the wind. The feeling that someone somewhere has said your name without sound. You blink into the darkness, heart steady, but aware your ears straining for a pattern in the silence. And then you hear it, your own voice. Only you're not speaking. You're dreaming. And apparently, you're talking in your sleep. And that, dear listener, is habit number 12, dreaming and talking in your sleep. A habit so harmless, so common, that today we'd laugh it off or maybe record it on our phones. But here it might cost you everything. In medieval times, the sanctity of dreams belonged to saints, prophets, and the dead. If you weren't one of those and you were caught murmuring through the night, twitching, whispering, gasping strange names, people didn't assume your brain was just doing housekeeping. They assumed someone else was speaking through you. Or worse, you were speaking to someone else. You roll over the rough linen twisted beneath you and catch the faint echo of your last muttered word. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was a phrase from childhood, or someone's name long forgotten. But if anyone had heard it, if a visitor had stayed the night and sat awake while you shifted and whispered, they might not have heard a name at all. They'd hear a summoning. Historians still argue whether sleep-speaking accusations were truly widespread, or more a literary construction used in witch trial records to build suspense. But trial transcripts are filled with phrases like, spoke in the night, murmured unknown words, and answered voices when none were present. And if someone claimed to have heard you laugh in your sleep, that's it. That's witch laughter. The devil's delight as he danced in your dreams. You remember the story of a girl barely 16 in a Saxon village who spoke in her sleep for 3 nights. Her mother tried to wake her. She couldn't. On the 4th night, the girl sat bolt upright and began reciting a prayer backwards. She didn't remember any of it. But she was exorcised anyway. And her family. They moved before winter. You think of the nights you've spent half awake, caught between sleep and memory. The things you say to yourself, soft apologies, unfinished sentences, whispers of people who aren't alive anymore. You're not conjuring anything. You're grieving, processing, dreaming. But dreams aren't safe here. Even having dreams can be dangerous. There's a fringe belief that witches dream with their eyes open, that they lie still, staring, unmoving, while their spirit leaves their body to attend Sabbaths or spread misfortune. Night flying, they called it. And if someone sees your eyes fluttering behind half-lidded lashes, if they hear your breath change rhythm and your mouth move without meaning, they won't assume you're chasing sheep across a meadow in your dream. They'll assume you're elsewhere, doing things. You once had a dream you still can't forget. A strange forest, a woman in red, birds flying backward. You woke, sweating, heart racing. You said her name aloud without meaning to, just once. It wasn't a name you knew, but it hung in the room like smoke. You never told anyone about it. But what if someone had heard sleepwalking too is no safer? You don't often walk in your sleep, but you've woken once or twice with the door unlatched, your shawl on backward, the cat sitting on the hearth like a sentry. That in this world is a journey unspoken. One recorded case from Bohemia describes a widow who sleepwalked into her neighbor's chicken coop. She left no footprints in the frost. The villagers said she floated. When she was accused, she said she remembered nothing. They called that proof of pact. If you don't recall the dream, it wasn't yours to begin with. And then there's the worst accusation of all dream prophecy. If you dream something that comes true, if you say something in your sleep that matches a future event, you're finished. Even a lucky guess can be twisted. You remember murmuring something once just before dawn. The milk will turn. It did. You didn't mean it. It wasn't even about milk. It was a phrase from a story your mother used to tell. But now the dairyman avoids you. He glances at his wife when he passes your house, muttering something about waking words. And when he dreams of a black figure standing in the corner of his barn, watching with red hair and green eyes, he knows exactly who he'll blame. There's no defense against this. You can't control your dreams. You can't silence yourself while unconscious. You can only hope no one hears. But in small villages with thin walls, shared hearths, and floorboards that creak like hungry mouths, someone always hears. So you try tricks, sleeping on your stomach, biting your tongue before bed, placing a cold stone under your pillow, an old wives' tale to pin your spirit to your body while you sleep. You tie a thread around your wrist. You press salt at your doorstep. Not because you believe it, but because they do. Because if someone knocks tomorrow and says they heard you say a name in the night, if they claim you whispered Latin without learning, or hummed a hymn in reverse, you won't be able to argue. You won't even remember. You'll just sit at your table trying to recall the shape of a dream already fading, and know that somewhere someone is adding your sleep to their story. And in this world, your silence is never as dangerous as what they imagine you said. You've been coughing this week. Just a tickle at first, dust in the throat, maybe the changing air. But it lingers dry and sharp, like something trying to speak through you. You press your hand to your chest. Drink water boiled with fennel and lemon balm, and wait for it to pass. It doesn't. And now the only thing more suspicious than your illness is the tea you're brewing to cure it. Because we've come to habit number 13, brewing strange-smelling teas. Herbal infusions, decoctions, tonics, whatever you call them. They're steaming, bitter, earthy, sometimes sweet, and always a little too mysterious for comfort. You stand at your hearth tonight watching steam curl from a clay mug, inside a blend of chamomile valerian root and a few crushed fennel seeds. It smells like sleep and soil and something deeper, something wild. You sip. It helps. But the smell drifts through the cracked window, and someone outside catches it. And that's all it takes. In a medieval world where most drinks were beer water, dangerous, or watered wine, tea was already suspect. And if it didn't come from the church garden or a licensed apothecary, and it smelled like anything other than mint, you were no longer just a tired woman trying to soothe her lungs. You were a brewer of potions. Historians still argue how common these herbal teas really were among village folk. Many point out that local plants like nettle, elderflower, and yarrow were widely used, even passed from generation to generation. But the problem wasn't in the use, it was in the perception of secrecy. If people saw you make it, it was medicine. If they smelled it later and didn't understand the ingredients, it was magic. You once mixed thyme, sage, and dried apple peel to help with a neighbor's headaches. She thanked you. But later, when her sister miscarried, she said the tea was too bitter to be natural. And now she won't drink anything you offer. There's a trial record from Zurich in the early 1500s about a woman who brewed a drink of darkness, as the village priest called it. The blend was later found to be nothing more than valerian blackcurrant leaves and honey. But because the smell made the priest nauseous, he insisted it had spiritual implications. The woman was burned. Her teas spilled into the soil. The priest was later treated for digestive ulcers by another herbalist in secret. There's a fringe tidbit from southern France that describes witches as women who could pull sleep from the roots of the earth. This likely referred to sedatives, natural ones like poppy or valerian. But the metaphor stuck. Sleep. They believed belonged to the soul. If you could brew sleep, you could steal souls. That's what you're doing tonight in their eyes. Brewing something that takes control. Your kitchen smells like damp bark and overripe mint. The kind of scent that clings to your shawl and follows you into the market. People notice. They wrinkle their noses. Someone asks, "What's that smell?" You answer too kindly. "Just something for my lungs." That answer isn't enough. They don't want to know what it is, they want to know what it does. Because every brew carries an effect, and every effect might be unnatural. Calming tea seduction, sleep tea possession, pain relief tea. Spell to dull the senses before a greater act. They never consider that you might just be tired, or sick, or human. You remember last year when a child burned his hand on a kettle and screamed for hours. You made a balm, of course, but you also brewed a tea with lavender, lemon, verbena, and just a pinch of poppy seed. Not enough to harm, just enough to soothe. He slept. Deeply. Too deeply, some said. And when he woke the next morning silent and dazed, his aunt declared that his soul had gone walking. They took him to the priest. You were never thanked. And now your name is in the margins of that family's prayers. Even the tools you use make it worse. That dented brass pot, too tarnished. That wooden stirring stick with the spiral on the end. Too strange. The fact that you stir counterclockwise without thinking, absolutely damning. Even color can work against you. If the tea turns green, she calls the forest. If it turns blue, she freezes hearts. If it turns red, she bleeds what's not hers to bleed. And yet what else do you have? You don't have a physician. You don't have coin for tinctures or powders or leeches. You have herbs. You have time. You have knowledge that's been whispered down through women's mouths and fingers for centuries. And if that knowledge smells strange, too bad. Tonight you steep your brew a little longer, just in case. You cough, and it's worse now. You add more valerian. The smell grows stronger, darker, sleepier. It reminds you of your grandmother's cottage, her old kettle, the time she gave you a mug of something thick and sweet that made your bad dreams go away for 2 nights straight. She never told you what was in it. But the smell, it's the same as now. And you realize, standing here with steam on your face, that she too must have brewed in silence. That she too must have waited until the windows were shut. That she must have been careful. Because maybe they looked at her once the same way they look at you now. Like you're not sick, but pretending. Like the steam from your cup isn't comfort, but invocation. So you blow gently across the surface of your tea, watching the tendrils of vapor curl toward the rafters like whispered words. And you sip slowly, because whether it heals you or haunts you, one thing is certain. It's already decided what you are. The fever had gripped you hard. You remember it only in flashes, the burning skin, the freezing sweats, the tremble in your hands, that made even a cup of water feel like a test. You couldn't eat, could barely speak. You lay there somewhere between prayer and surrender, watching the rafters warp and twist in your vision. Everyone thought you were going to die. And now you're up, walking, breathing, gathering firewood like nothing happened. Which is the problem, because congratulations, you've now triggered habit number 14, having a sudden illness recovery. In a village where most people don't recover, at least not quickly and not completely, a bounce back like yours doesn't read as miraculous. It reads as suspicious, and not in the "you must be blessed" kind of way. No, in the "you must have made a deal" kind of way. You didn't die when you were supposed to. And that to them means someone intervened. And it wasn't God. There's no such thing here as a clean recovery. If you heal too fast, they say you've tricked death. If your scars fade too well, they say you've swallowed something unholy. And if your strength returns before the final prayers are said, well, they say the devil came knocking and you let him in. Historians still argue about this one. Some claim villagers truly believed that survival outside of a priest's blessing indicated spiritual corruption. Others say it was rooted in jealousy, grief, and pattern making, grasping for a scapegoat when a loved one died, but you didn't. Regardless, the record is clear: recovering too well wasn't safe. You remember when Thomas the cooper's wife fell ill. She lingered for 2 weeks, fever, coughing, weight loss. Then she simply got better. She returned to market the next morning, skin still flushed, but walking like nothing had happened. 2 days later, Thomas was dead. The village said she passed the sickness into him like a sponge wrung out. Said she gave the fever away. You saw the way people stepped back from her after that. You see them doing it to you now. No one says it aloud, of course. They just stop knocking on your door. They hand you change with an open palm, not fingers. The baker no longer asks if you want the crusty end. You hear the whispers when you leave your cottage. She looked like she was dying. And now, too quick, too sudden. She didn't even go to the priest. Ah, yes, that part. Because you didn't call the priest. You were too weak. Or maybe you were too proud. Maybe you didn't want to lie there sweaty and shaking while a man in robes muttered over you with a vial of water and a list of sins. Whatever your reason, you healed without him. And in their eyes, that's worse than never healing at all. There's a case from Milan, half historical, half legend, of a woman who fell from a ladder, broke her ribs, and walked again within 3 days. A local healer gave her a tincture of foxglove and mullein, and her pain vanished by the week's end. The villagers didn't trust it, called it borrowed life, said she'd taken someone else's days. When the healer was questioned, she claimed divine guidance. They burned her anyway. There's a fringe belief from the Alps, older than most church doctrine, that says if you survive an illness you were meant to die from, the earth will take payment another way. A toe, a tooth, a friend, a flock. Something precious must be surrendered. So when you walk into the market today, upright, clear-eyed, barely even coughing, people take inventory. What did you lose? Who paid for your health? And if nothing's gone missing, they'll start to think it should. Even the fact that you didn't scar becomes evidence. You had fever blisters. Everyone saw them. But now your face is clear. Your lips healed. Someone remarks, there's not even a mark. And someone else says, not yet. Because in their minds, healing is not neat. It's ugly, long, punishing. Yours wasn't, which means it wasn't real. You pour water into your kettle that evening and catch a glimpse of yourself in the reflection. Skin pale but not sick, eyes tired but sharp. You feel better, stronger even, and it frightens you. Because now you have to act sick, just a little. Cough now and then. Walk with a hand on your ribs. Wince if you sit too fast. You do it not because you're hurting, but because they need to see it. There's a tale from the Low Countries of a woman who continued to limp months after a leg injury, even though she could walk fine. She was seen as humble, penitent, still healing, they said. But another woman, her cousin, sprang back in days. She was accused of witchcraft within a week. 2 women, same bones, different endings. There's even a superstition, some say it started in Spain, that if you heal without asking, the illness returns in another form. And if it doesn't, that means it went somewhere. And somewhere often meant someone else. So now they're watching. If the baker's baby gets sick, if the old shepherd stumbles, if a horse goes lame, they'll say, "She walked too soon. She laughed again too quickly. She ate bread the day after her fever broke." Because in this world, survival doesn't earn admiration. It earns questions. And once you've dodged death, they want to know what you paid and who paid it for you. So tonight you'll cough once before bed. Not because you need to, but because someone's listening through the window. and they need to believe your body hasn't finished healing. Even if it has, the harvest dance is in 3 days. You won't go, of course. You never do. Not because you aren't invited. You're not to be clear. But because you've long since learned what happens when people look at you too closely in public under lantern light. You're not invisible. You're worse. You're noticed. And that's the danger now, isn't it? You caught the eye of the wrong person. And now everyone's watching, not because you did anything, but because you didn't do anything to stop it. This is habit number 15, being the target of jealousy. You didn't flirt. You didn't scheme. You didn't even smile. You just stood in the bread line 2 weeks ago with your hair braided down your back, and the miller's son glanced at you for too long. And that was enough. Because now the girl he's supposed to marry won't speak to you. Her mother crosses herself when you pass. And when someone's pigs got sick yesterday, guess whose name came up in the same breath? Yours. Not because you hexed anything, not because you did anything wrong, but because jealousy has always been a kind of witchcraft all its own. Historians still argue whether witch accusations were fueled more by power structures or personal vendettas. But when you dig through the layers of parchment and Latin and legal procedure, what you find again and again is this: someone got angry, and the person they envied most was accused. Jealousy is petty, cruel, and profoundly dangerous in places where luck is scarce. If your crops grow too well, someone says it's because you stole their rain. If your child lives and theirs dies, someone says it's because you gave your joy to the wrong spirit. And if a man, any man, looks at you more than once, you're a temptress, which is a word they use when they can't say witch out loud. There's a true and chilling case from 15th century Italy where a woman was accused of casting love spells after the count's son mentioned her name at dinner. She was pretty, yes, but quiet, private, and that silence gave people room to fill in the blanks. She must have given him something. She looked at him with those eyes. She never even smiled at him. That's the worst part. You're not even particularly beautiful. Or maybe you are in a quiet way. Your mouth turns up at the corners when you're thinking. You tilt your head when you listen. You smell faintly of rosemary and ash, and something else no one can name. That's enough. Too pretty, and they say you're charming them. Not pretty enough, and they say you long for what you can't have, and that's where curses come from. Jealousy doesn't care about fairness. It cares about stories. And once a jealous person starts whispering, it only takes a few others to nod for the whole village to start rewriting you. You once complimented the weaver's daughter on her dress. She told her friends you must have envied it. She tore it that same night while dancing. The hem caught on a nail. She said it was you, because that's how these stories grow. Small things, a smile, a glance, a compliment. Each one twisted until it becomes a blade turned inward. Even success is suspicious. You planted squash this year. The yield was better than expected. The vines thick, the flesh sweet. You gave 2 to the baker's wife. She thanked you. 2 days later, she burned her wrist, pulling bread from the oven. She never spoke to you again. There's a fringe belief in Northern Europe that says witches are made, not born, and that they don't even know they're witches until someone envies them enough to speak the word aloud. That envy activates something, names them, twists the air around them. You wonder if that's happened to you already. You remember walking home one evening and hearing a child call you her. Not your name, just her. A soft hiss like they didn't want to say more. You turned around. They were already running. Now everything you own is scrutinized. Your tools, your garden, your clothes. You wear a blue ribbon once just to feel something close to joy, and by nightfall, someone leaves a lump of salt on your doorstep. A sign, a warning, a ward. Not because you cursed anyone, but because you were seen smiling. And that joy, that spark of contentment that was too much. Because jealous people don't want you to suffer. They want to be sure you're not doing better than them. Which means if your chickens lay too many eggs, if your roof doesn't leak, if your eyes don't look tired enough, you're not lucky. You're suspicious. Jealousy finds the smallest crack and calls it a window. There's an old tale from Sweden about a woman whose wheat ripened too early. Her neighbors said she must have fed the field with her womb. A crude, vicious phrase. But they meant it literally, that she'd traded her fertility for harvest. The wheat was burned. She was sent to beg in another town. She didn't even have children to begin with. But they didn't care. Because when people want to hurt you, the truth becomes irrelevant. And jealousy, that's a weapon with 1,000 edges. You sit on your step tonight, trying not to feel proud of your herbs, your stacked woodpile, your dry feet. You try not to smile when you sip your tea. You try to shrink. Because if you stand tall, if you thrive, they will come for you. Not because you're a witch, but because they've decided it's easier to burn your house down than to admit they wanted what you have. The wind carries the sound of bells this morning. Church bells, slow, heavy, deliberate. They echo across the valley like a warning more than a welcome, rattling birds from the trees and making every house feel smaller. You pause mid-step, bundle of kindling tucked under one arm, and glance toward the steeple. There's a sermon today. The whole village will be there. You will not. You never are. Because why would you go somewhere where they look at you like that? And anyway, you have your own books. Which is exactly the problem. This is habit number 16, being educated, especially if you're a woman. And not just literate. Educated. You read. You write. You keep notes on herbs and seasons, draw constellations in the margins of your scrap paper recipes. Your handwriting isn't graceful, but it's fast, clean, efficient. And if anyone finds out, you're in trouble. Because in this time, a woman who reads is a woman who knows, and a woman who knows too much. That's a danger they can't afford. Historians have long debated just how rare female literacy really was in the medieval period. It varied widely, depending on geography class and religious status. Nuns could read. Noble women had tutors. But common women, villagers, widows who live alone, not supposed to. Not safe if they do. And definitely not forgiven if caught. You remember the first time someone saw your notes. It was the priest's assistant, barely 16, poking through your kitchen under the pretense of checking for spoiled flour. He opened the little box where you keep scrap pages, lists of tinctures, drawings of plants, translations of a few Latin phrases you've picked up from listening at the church. He didn't say anything then, but he told someone. And now people look at you differently, not just like you're strange, like you're dangerous. Because knowledge is power, and power in the wrong hands, that's witchcraft. Especially when it's written in symbols they don't understand. Your sketches of plants, they say they're sigils. Your Latin practice, they say it's summoning. Your star diagrams, markings for a midnight flight. Never mind that the priest himself draws the same stars when he plans holy days. Never mind that monks keep entire libraries. That doctors scrawl prescriptions in a script no one can read. They are allowed. You are not. You have no parchment, no ink made holy by scriptoria. You write in charcoal on scraps of hide and rough cloth. You dip into soot to mark pages. You press words into the wood of your table with the tip of a blade, when you can't find anything else. And that to them looks primitive, secretive, occult. There's a case from France, real detailed harrowing, where a midwife was executed after her home was searched and a bundle of writings were found. They were nothing more than birth records, names and dates, and weights of babies she'd delivered. But there were drawings in the margins, symbols she used to track breech births and twin labors. They called them devil marks. They burned her for them. There's a fringe belief still whispered in the darker corners of rural Europe that if a woman writes her own name more than once, she risks writing her soul out of her body. That the act of writing is a kind of incantation, and if done without priestly oversight, it opens a door. You've written your name dozens of times, and more dangerously, you've written other people's, because you track what you see. Births, deaths, illnesses. You try to find patterns not for prophecy, but for preparation. You want to be ready when the next sickness comes. But if someone finds those notes, your guesses, your theories, what will they say? She wrote about my son. She knew he'd be sick. She made it happen. You try to keep it all hidden now. Your pages are rolled tight and slipped into a hollow beneath the floor. You write only at night, and never where the light might show from the windows. But it's not just what you write. It's how you speak. You don't fumble over your words like the others. You speak clearly. You ask questions no one else dares to ask. You know the names of things, plants, stars, illnesses, bones, and you know their meanings. There's a tale from the eastern edges of the Holy Roman Empire about a woman who corrected a monk's pronunciation of a saint's name. She said it kindly, quietly, but someone heard. She was accused of unholy instruction, because only the devil, they said, puts his tongue in a woman's mouth to teach her Latin. So now you stay silent when you hear mistakes. You don't correct the baker's wife when she misidentifies fennel for dill. You don't offer help when the priest fumbles through a Latin phrase he's clearly forgotten, because the risk of being right outweighs the comfort of being good. Tonight, as the church bells toll again for Vespers, you sit at your table with a bit of old linen stretched flat before you. You dip your finger into soot and write slowly, silently, the word for healing in 3 languages. Not because it will save you, but because it reminds you who you are. They can take your breath, your herbs, even your name, but they can't take what you know. And in this place, knowledge isn't freedom, it's firewood. It's a quiet morning just after the frost, and you're slicing apples by the hearth. Smooth, practiced motions with your old paring knife. Your cat is curled beside you. Your tea steams gently nearby, and outside the world creaks under the weight of winter's slow advance. Everything seems ordinary, until you drop the knife. It hits the floor point down, and when you bend to pick it up, you do it with your left hand. No one sees you. Not this time. But if they did, if someone passed the open door just then, that little innocent moment would be all it takes. Because this is habit number 17, being left-handed. Yes, left-handed. That's it. Just that. You eat with your left. Write with your left. You hold your knife, your broom, your mug with a preference you were born with, and no matter how subtle it seems, how completely irrelevant it marks you. Not in ink, in superstition. Medieval Europe feared left-handedness with a particular irrational conviction. The left side was linked with the sinister, the unclean, the corrupt. Even the Latin word for left is sinistra, the root of the modern word sinister. Coincidence, maybe, But in a time ruled by metaphor, coincidence becomes proof. Historians still argue whether the stigma was more religious or cultural, but church doctrine certainly didn't help. Paintings of the Last Judgment often showed the damned cast to the left, while the saved ascended to the right. The sheep went right. The goats, those untrustworthy, chaotic beings, went left. So when you favor your left hand, you are to them choosing the wrong side, even if you don't know it. There's a well-documented case in England from the 14th century. A young woman who churned butter with her left hand was accused of cursing the dairy. The butter wouldn't set. Her entire family defended her, saying it had nothing to do with the churning. The village disagreed. She was whipped publicly, her left arm bound behind her for 30 days. There's a fringe belief in rural Welsh communities that witches can only write spells with their left hands, that the right hand writes scripture, and the left hand writes everything else. You've written things with your left, not spells, just recipes, notes, lists. But that doesn't matter, because when someone wants to suspect you, they'll find what they need. And a dominant left hand. That's a perfect start. You once tried to switch when you were younger. Someone saw you stirring a pot with your left and muttered something about the crooked path. You spent the next month forcing your right hand to do everything. It fumbled, shook, dropped more than it held. Your body rebelled, your hands never forgot. And now even when you try, your left hand always finds its way back. The stronger one, the faster one, the one that just feels correct, which means to them it's the wrong one. Even your gestures give you away. When you wave or reach or cover your mouth in surprise, if it's with your left, someone notices. They might not say it aloud, but it tugs at them, like a thread left out of place. Left-handedness becomes more than a quirk. It becomes a trait of darkness. Even your shadows work against you. There's a strange old superstition, rare but real, that a witch's shadow falls differently. That when she walks at sunset, her left side stretches longer than her right. You don't know how that started. Probably someone's imagination paired with paranoia. But the story still circulates. And if your shadow does something strange one day, bends oddly on a stone wall, flickers against the grain of torchlight, people will remember which hand you favor, and they'll say it fits. You wear gloves more now, not always, but often enough to hide which hand does what. You switch tasks in public, hold baskets with your right, stir with your right, pick herbs with your right. But your left always aches afterward, like it's being punished. There's a cruel irony to it, because being left-handed doesn't mean anything. Not really, not morally, not spiritually. But when someone's baby falls ill, when a cow won't produce milk, when a girl twists her ankle running too fast, they start looking for signs, something small, something subtle. And if you happen to reach for a piece of bread with your left hand, while their grief is still raw, you become that sign. You once saw a woman at market who stitched with her left. Her embroidery was clean, tight, perfect. Someone said her patterns looked too symmetrical, that her stitches must have been made by someone possessed. You never saw her again after midsummer. So now you eat alone. You stir alone. You write only when the shutters are drawn, and even then you pause every time you switch pens between hands. Because in this world, the devil doesn't always wear horns. Sometimes he just holds the ladle in the wrong hand. And in a village hunting witches, the smallest gesture can damn you. You're walking along the ridge trail this morning, basket light on your arm, breath soft in the crisp air. The sun hasn't quite broken through the mist, and everything feels suspended, like the world hasn't made up its mind yet about what it wants to be. That's when it happens. You stop cold, because something's wrong. You don't know how you know, but you do. You feel it in your spine, in the twist of your stomach, in the way the wind stutters against your cheek, and without even thinking, you turn off the path. You take the long way around. 15 minutes later, you hear shouting in the distance. A cart overturned, a mule dead, a child nearly crushed. You weren't there. And that's the problem. Because now you've committed habit number 18, having visions or intuition. Not visions like prophets. Not dreams with angels and swords and divine instruction. No. Just a feeling. Just that strange sense, a shiver, a whisper in the chest that tells you when not to go somewhere or when to speak or when someone is lying. That unspoken thing people call women's sense. And here, that kind of knowledge isn't instinct. It's evidence. In a village where everyone believes things happen for a reason, knowing something before it happens is the most suspicious habit of all. Because if you knew a cart would crash, why and how? And who told you? Historians still argue about the overlap between intuition and prophecy in early Europe. The church, of course, allowed for visions, some visions, if they came to saints or monks or approved mystics. But the moment a woman had a feeling, especially one who wasn't cloistered or sanctioned, it wasn't holiness. It was heresy. Or worse, witchcraft. You remember a winter a few years ago when you refused to go out on a market day. You stayed home, built your fire, kept the door shut. People called you strange for missing it. But then the fever swept through the square. 5 sick by morning, 1 dead by nightfall. They said you knew you didn't, not with words. You just felt it. You've always been like this. Sensitive to change. Quick to shiver when something shifts in the air. You can tell when an argument is brewing before the voices rise. You know when a storm will come not by clouds, but by silence. And once, just once, you told a woman not to let her son near the edge of the lake. He slipped anyway, broke his leg, didn't drown, thank the saints, but she never spoke to you again, because you warned her. And that warning in her grief-racked mind meant you wanted it to happen. There's a record from the Rhineland of a woman who claimed to feel sickness coming in her bones. She would know when fever would strike days before the first cough. She was accused of sending the illnesses herself, of carrying them on her skin like seeds. Her neighbors shaved her head and dragged her through the fields. She was never seen again. You keep your instincts quiet now, but sometimes they slip through. A glance at a cradle, a sudden flinch near a man with too much drink in his eyes, a soft, unfinished sentence. Don't go down that road today, even if you don't explain it, even if you don't say why. They still remember. There's a fringe belief in Baltic lore that witches don't just see the future, they shape it, that their warnings create the very events they predict. If you say something will break, it breaks. If you dream of fire, something burns. So when you speak of danger, you're not being cautious. You're calling it. And that makes your silence just as dangerous. Because if you don't say anything, if you see something and keep it to yourself and something bad happens, they'll say you knew. And worse, they'll say you let it happen. You once stayed quiet when a neighbor's goat got sick. You had a sense of it, the way the animal wouldn't meet your eyes, the way it pressed its head into the corner of the pen. But you didn't want to say anything. Not again. The goat died. The next day, its owner spat near your door. Didn't say a word. Didn't need to. You press your hand to your chest now and try to slow your thoughts. The cart accident is still echoing in your mind. You don't know how you knew. You never do. There's no formula, no spell. Just that pulling in your gut, like the future, reaching back to tug at your spine. And in this world, that's enough to mark you. You stare into your fire that night and remember something your grandmother once said. We carry too much truth in our bones for quiet living. You didn't understand it then. You do now. You try to live quietly. You try not to speak what you feel. But the world comes anyway. The patterns reveal themselves. The winds whisper. And your silence becomes just another form of confession. Because they don't care whether you wanted to know. They only care that you did. And in this village, seeing the future doesn't make you wise. It makes you a threat to the present. There's a fire in the bakery. You smell it before you see it, thick, oily smoke threading its way through the narrow lanes like a snake. By the time you reach the square, the flames are licking the roof beams, and people are shouting, running, forming a frantic line to the well. The baker's wife is crying. Her husband is nowhere to be seen. You watch frozen, clutching your shawl as chaos rips through the heart of the village. And you just know, that someone will mention your name before the ashes even cool. Because you weren't in the fire. You weren't even near it. And when that kind of luck strikes in a place like this, you're not seen as fortunate. You're seen as protected by something unnatural. Welcome to habit number 19, surviving accidents others don't. The fire spares your home. The sickness skips your bed. The roof holds when the others cave in. The wolf howls but doesn't come near. You live while someone else dies. And in a world ruled by fear, survival is suspicious. Because why you historians still argue whether the association between survival and guilt was truly rooted in theology or if it simply evolved as grief's most convenient weapon. It's easier, after all, to blame the one left standing than to accept the randomness of death. But in medieval Europe, life was rarely seen as random. It was earned or stolen. And if your luck runs too long, your breath too steady, your eyes too sharp after something terrible, they'll say you didn't survive in spite of the misfortune. They'll say you survived because you caused it. There's a recorded case from the Tyrol region of a woman who outlived her entire family after a plague outbreak. She buried all 6 of them herself. No priest, no doctor, just her and the spade. She lit candles for weeks. No one helped her grieve. They said she was touched by the fire. They said fire doesn't burn fire. She disappeared that winter. You've survived too much yourself. A falling beam during last spring's storm missed you by inches. A mule kicked and shattered the ribs of the man behind you. A pot of boiling water tipped but only splashed your boots. You didn't ask to be lucky. But they act as if you took luck away from someone else. Like it's a commodity. A theft. You remember standing outside your home after the lightning struck the church tower. Everyone ran for shelter. You didn't. You stood there still, your mouth open, watching the sky spit white fire into holy stone. Someone whispered later, she didn't flinch. What they meant was you didn't burn. There's a fringe belief, dark and murky, that witches carry silent charms, invisible wards stitched under the skin or hidden behind the teeth. Some say the devil gives them bones of ash, so fire passes through them. Others say they wear shadow like a second skin, shielding them from harm while the world shatters around them. You've never felt charmed. You've felt tired, lonely. You've dug more graves than you can count, none of them your own. And yet when the butcher's daughter drowned last summer, people asked why you weren't there. You were at home, sick, feverish. But they said, of course she was. As if you chose that moment to be absent. As if your body knew what was coming and stepped aside. Even now, as the fire at the bakery dies to a smolder, you feel their eyes shift. You didn't run. You didn't scream. You didn't lift a bucket or cry to the heavens. And that stillness, your stillness is all they need to start whispering. She was untouched. She was unworried. She was watching. There's a story, old unverified, the kind they tell around dying fires, of a woman who walked through battlefields without a scratch. Arrows bent around her. Blades wouldn't touch her. They said her shadow walked a few paces ahead of her, clearing the path. When asked how she survived, she only said, "I stepped where the blood wasn't." No one believed her. Because in a world where death is everywhere, survival isn't sacred, it's suspicious. You try to make sense of it yourself. Why you lived when others didn't. Why your garden blooms while theirs withers. Why your roof holds. Why your legs carry you one step further than expected. You wonder if your luck will run out. And you wonder what will happen when it doesn't. Because sooner or later, another fire will come. Another fever. Another fall. And when it does, they won't ask how you survived. They'll ask who you sacrificed. So tonight, as you wash ash from your hands and close the shutters tighter than usual, you murmur a prayer you no longer believe in. Not for protection, for plausibility. Because in this village, survival isn't your triumph, it's your evidence. The church bell rings once low and hollow across the fields. Not for mass, not for marriage. This one is for a trial. You don't need to ask who it's for. You already know. Because yesterday you hesitated before answering a question. Because last week you returned a glance that lasted just one breath too long. Because a year ago you said no. And now you're guilty of the most invisible crime of all, habit number 20, disagreeing with church authority. You didn't argue. Not really. You simply asked. You asked why the priest said women should not speak in the gathering, when every sainted woman in the stained glass held open books. You asked why certain herbs were banned during Lent, when they grew in the church garden. You asked why, when the miller beat his wife with a belt, only she was made to confess. You didn't raise your voice. You just didn't lower it quite enough. And here, that's heresy by volume. The church central, absolute, unquestioned wove itself into every fiber of life. To question its words was to question reality. And to question reality, of course, is to suggest that you have access to another version of it. And if you do, then you must not be listening to God. You must be listening to someone else. Historians often point out that many witch trials began not with cauldrons or charms, but with dissent. A refusal, a raised eyebrow, a contradiction spoken softly, the word no in the wrong context at the wrong moment, especially from a woman. You remember when the new priest arrived, young, smooth-voiced. He asked you if you attended Mass regularly. You said, when the words mean something. He smiled, but his eyes did not. There's a real case transcribed in fragments from a town near Avignon. A woman refused communion after being shamed by a deacon. She said she would take the body of Christ from no man's filthy hand. The village said she'd spat on the host. She swore she hadn't. They burned her without trial. Here the hierarchy isn't a ladder, it's a pit. And if you aren't standing at the bottom, you're accused of trying to climb out. Your knowledge makes you dangerous. But your defiance, that's what seals it. Because it's not just that you ask questions. It's that you don't apologize afterward. You don't hang your head. You don't beg to be corrected. You simply go on unmoved, unbent. And in a world designed to keep women folded and fearful, your upright spine is read as resistance. There's a fringe belief, most likely whispered by clergy in fear, that witches can't kneel in church, that the ground rejects their weight. You've knelt plenty of times, but once you stayed seated during a sermon on obedience because your knees ached too much to bend. Someone noticed, and that was that. You've tried. You've stayed quiet. You've nodded. You've bitten your tongue until it tasted like pennies. But then the child died. The one the priest refused to bless because her mother had remarried without confession. The mother cried and you held her hand. And when she said God took her, you said nothing. Nothing. Because you didn't agree. And silence in that moment was louder than any blasphemy. So now they ring the bell. You know the rhythm of it. One slow toll for summoning, one pause, 3 quick beats for accusation. A gathering in the square. A list of charges, witnesses, rumors shaped like facts. And in every voice, certainty. Because you didn't bend. You didn't kneel. You didn't confess to things you never believed were wrong. You walk toward the square now, slow, steady. You won't run. You won't beg. Because to beg would mean you did something wrong. And you know with a terrible clarity that the only thing you did was refuse to let someone else tell your story. And that to them is unforgivable. So you stand in the center of the square as the villagers gather, faces drawn tight. Some look away. A few even cry. But no one speaks for you. Not because they agree, but because they're afraid of being next. The priest steps forward, robe billowing like smoke, and begins his speech. You don't listen to the words. You already know them. They've been rehearsing this ending for years. And when it comes, whatever form it takes, it won't be a surprise. You'll survive it. Or you won't. But either way, you'll remain whole. Because no fire, no rope, no crowd's condemnation can change what's always been true. You did nothing wrong. You just didn't worship the right people. And in this place that is the final and greatest sin. The bells fall silent. The sky darkens with clouds too tired to rain. And the village slowly slips back into its routine just as it always does, wringing the air of its fear, pressing suspicion into corners where it can smolder quietly again. And you vanish from the story. Not forgotten, just unmentioned. The way so many were. Your little cottage remains shutters, half-latched garden, overgrown herbs, drying quietly above the cold hearth. Your presence lingers not as a ghost, but as a lesson, a warning, a memory, a resistance. The wind rustles your pages, left behind recipes, prayers, theories never finished. And somewhere far from the village, a girl reads one. She doesn't understand all the words, but she understands the feeling. And that feeling, that quiet defiance, that soft and steadfast knowing will survive. Because stories don't end with silence. They end when someone listens long enough to remember. So wherever you are tonight, breathe a little slower. Let your shoulders loosen. Let the air cool your skin. Let your thoughts float untethered. The fire's out. The wind is gentle. The village sleeps again. And whatever it feared in you, it can't follow you here. Not anymore. Sleep safely now. Sleep freely. You're not in their world tonight. You're in your own. End of script. Sweet dreams.